lesson 33. We continue with the philosophy of the Kleshas according to Patanjali, chapter 2 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Last week we introduced the philosophy of the Kleshas. There are 5 of them, and we finished with Sutra 5 saying that ignorance is the basis for the kleshas that follow. There are only 5. Ignorance is the first one. Because of ignorance, there's egoism, followed by attachment, followed by anger or hatred, repulsion, and the last one and the final situation or condition that most people end up in and end up living in is fear or fear of death. All the afflictions we encounter in life, all the conflicts, all the misery, all the suffering can all be deduced to these 5 elements. Ignorance, egoism, attachment, anger, hatred, and fear. Sutra 6 deals with what comes after ignorance. Asmita is the identity or blending together, as it were, of the power of consciousness, Purusha, with the power of cognition, Buddhi. Purusha is the soul. Buddhi is the intellect. In the crown chakra, Atman is located. Atman is the self with capital S. But like everything else, it is subject to the fluctuations between tamas and rajas. Egoism occurs when there is tamas in the causal body, the crown chakra. Tamas is a contraction of energy. Now we know from our previous classes that tamas is a natural tendency in the universe, and therefore in us as human beings. It is the continuous condensation of energy that leads to the bottom. Contraction of energy, condensation. Atman, when contracting, when the causal body is contracting as a result of tamas, which is the dominant condition we tend to be in if we don't take control of our condition by means of yoga and the likes, it manifests as ego or egoism as a result of tamas. That is why ego is a big issue in many situations. Egoism, here you see that there is a conflict between soul consciousness, Purusha, and Buddhi, intellect. When there is a contraction of the crown chakra leading to the manifestation of ego, we identify with things. And that is where ego manifests. We become emotional. Ego is a thought loaded with emotion. And because we identify, it leads to situation where conflict occur. All the wars in history started with ego. There is a violation of ego. Somebody feels disrespected. Somebody feels their rights to be violated. Somebody feels, it's always ego. The problem is that we're not aware of it because it's simply part of human functioning, human behavior. The good news is, now you know. And it is your task from now on to try to detect, to distinguish when your ego is being triggered. And that's not difficult at all, because anytime, every time you feel an emotion welling up in you, whether that is a positive or a negative one, usually a negative one, but also with positive ones, it's ego. So from now on, there was another sutra last week that said you solve the kleshas by bringing them back to their origin. Remember? That is what you do here. It is natural human behavior, and it is a big problem because it occurs subconsciously. People are not aware that they are functioning like that, so they are not aware that they are acting and reacting like that. What they are aware of, what we are aware of, is the misery that it ends up in, the conflict that results from it. And we think, well, what can I do about it? This apparently is life. I just have to accept it as it is, deal with it. Yoga says, no, this is how it works. Just pay attention, keep your eyes open, and be humble, because ego requires being honest with yourself about your good things, but more importantly about your bad things, your weaknesses. We have a tendency to identify with things, with ourselves, our image in the mirror, our nationality, our culture, our past. We identify with everything. I'm a yogi. I'm a fake yogi. So you deal with ego. You can deal with ego with humor, especially self-deprecating humor. Do you know that? You know Mr. Bean? The whole purpose of Mr. Bean is to keep a mirror in front of you. The whole purpose of comedy is to make your energy flow again, so that you can function on the crown chakra level again, so you can rationalize your ego. That is the purpose of humor. Every ancient community had their own village fool, their own village clown. And the purpose of the village clown was to make people laugh, and not just for fun, but to make you realize your ego. Can you see that? If you're stuck or stuck up with yourself and your ego, just go to Netflix and watch something funny, something ridiculous, something hilarious. It really works, it really helps. But I gave you a demonstration also how it works, how you can deal with yourself. By not taking yourself too serious. Because there everything gets... It's ego when you take yourself too serious. I'm very good at cutting that off at the roots. I'm very good at making fun of myself. My appearance, my whatever, my faults. It took a long time for me to realize the value in that, but it has everything to do with ego. What are we talking about here? Is when you know how it works, pay attention. When you're hit with ego, it's not happening subconsciously anymore from now on. It should not. You should more and more be able to detect it. In the beginning, sometimes you will miss it, but you know now how it works. And whenever it happens again that you're struck with misery, with conflict, with your partner, with your boss, manager, with people in the subway, in the street, neighbors, do not go into the conflict. Try to have a moment of consciousness. What is happening here? How do I feel? Do not point fingers. Do not point, how do you say? Do not blame. That's a lost exercise that only leads to more conflict and more upheaval. Try to bring it back to consciousness, which is the opposite of avidya. The opposite of avidya is vidya. Avidya is ignorance that led to egoism. You bring it back to its origin. But avidya is now not ignorance anymore, it becomes wisdom, because that moment of consciousness that you allowed yourself led to insight, which is the opposite of avidya. But that's how you bring it back to its origin. Easy? No, we have to pay attention. This is again the meaning behind the symbolism of the deer in the heart chakra, alertness. Alertness is not a luxury. It's not something that you can choose. Because every time you're not alert, especially as a yogi, you become more and more sensitive to this. Every time you're not alert, you find yourself falling into that trap again. Every time you're not alert, you find yourself subconsciously causing misery again, of one form or another. So it's a very interesting process. It may seem very tiring, but it is very rewarding in the end. You will see your misery diminish. You will see your conflicts reduce. Even better, the misery that we used to attract, unknowingly, subconsciously, becomes more and more replaced by good things being attracted to us. So the implications here are considerable. Ego is a very difficult issue to deal with for everybody. For me, for you, for everybody. Play with it. Be honest about it. And very importantly, do not allow ego to make you end up in another conflict again, another bout of misery again. In the end, yoga is still the science of control of life. And here, it's just a matter of control again, controlling the ego. It's also clear, by the way, when you understand the fluctuations of energy, tamas and rajas, ego manifests most strongly when we are in a tamas condition. It is very natural, even if you do not know what we are studying here today, it is very natural for people who practice yoga, who therefore more and more replace tamas with rajas, that they also naturally, often subconsciously, start dealing with their ego in a different way. Only because it is subconscious, there is no control. So there is very much up and down. By studying this rationally, you formalize it, and you can start consciously putting it into practice. Play with it. Play with the concept in daily life situations. And stop taking yourself too serious. Because that in itself leads to a contraction of energy, tamas, so it's a vicious cycle. We take ourselves too serious, contraction upon contraction, and ego only becomes stronger. Now, remember that ego in itself is not a bad thing. It's only bad if this contraction occurs and it leads to us identifying with the situation we find ourselves in. We identify with the emotions that we feel, and it leads to conflict. Ego is an indivisible part of every human being, although some people give the suggestion that ego must die. It doesn't. You must die. Ego dies because you are confronted with your misery and realize that only you are responsible for it. That is what leads to the humility that allows you to take control of ego in the next situation. But ego that is under control, when there is an expansion rather than a contraction, manifests in very positive ways. You can see this with people with big ego. We talk about big ego in a negative way, usually. That person has a big ego. Biden has a big ego. Trump has a big ego. Obama has a big ego. People with big ego you always find at the top of society, whether that is in business or in politics. But those people are there not by luck or by coincidence. They automatically, sooner or later in life, end up at the top of society. But you can clearly make the distinction here, where ego manifests in a good way, in a constructive way, and where ego manifests as sheer egoism. Trump needs a kick in the butt, a kick in Muladhara chakra, so his energy rises up to the crown chakra. It will not help, I'm sure. Sutra 7. That attraction which accompanies pleasure is raga. So, ignorance, egoism, attachment. Attachment. Raga. Let me first explain raga. There is an Indian music genre that is called raga. Later we started calling it New Age music. It's the music with the tingling bells and the flute and the pleasant music that often tries to emulate a feeling, an atmosphere that you can encounter in a nice natural environment. Titles of these songs are therefore often a nice Sunday morning stroll on the beach, or dinner at sundown, or something related to nature. attachment you can be attached to your partner, you will be, you become. I am attached to my dogs. I love them dearly. We have very strong emotional bond also because we saved each other, we rescued each other in a way. You can be last week or the week before, when we had our first class again after the break. The moment I entered the studio, I felt like coming home. That is attachment, that is raga too. Raga. When I go back to Holland and I take the bicycle from my mom's shed to drive around the neighborhood where I grew up, that's pure raga. The old man in the coffee shop in southern France, after 40 years, still only being able to talk about the Second World War and his experiences, that's raga. My sisters meeting their friends after 30 years after high school, that's raga. Raga, we think that if there is a positive emotion, that it's good, it's okay. And of course, it's preferable compared to a negative memory or emotion, which is also raga. Being stuck in thoughts about the misery that you have gone through is also raga. Raga is attachment to, in fact, in yoga you do not actually distinguish between good and bad because everything is just as it is. The reason why is because raga is simply a distraction. It keeps you away from being in the here and now, the present. The past is gone, good or bad. You cannot turn back the clock. But we are human beings, and we have a tendency to hold on, whether it's misery or melancholy, good memories. I should say there is nothing wrong with that, provided that you are conscious of it happening, because people drown in it to such an extent that, like with the old man in the cafe in southern France, 40 years later, his life hasn't changed for 40 years because he's stuck in that event in the past that traumatized him. So don't get me wrong, I'm not being judgmental, I'm making observations here so that hopefully you recognize it. Attachment is when you talk about relationships, attachment is the cause of conflicts. And here you see the connection with ego. Ego also leads to conflicts. Attachment also leads to conflicts. In the end, it always ends up in fear. In between, there is anger, hatred. This is all part of relationships. You recognize that? With your parents, with your lover, with your children if you have. So just like with ego, it's human. We were just born with this. What we need to do, we cannot cut it out. We cannot just delete it. what we need to do, same as with egoism, bring it back to its origin, which is, again, ignorance. By being conscious of it, you turn ignorance into wisdom. Be aware of attachment. We have attachment to, I had attachment to so many things like everybody else. My nationality. Not only from the Netherlands, being Dutch, but being from Amsterdam, the capital. Everybody else living outside of the capital, there's a bunch of peasants. Even though Rotterdam, The Hague, Utrecht are almost as big cities as Amsterdam. But that's how Amsterdam people think. Attached to Hapkido, that has been my identity for years. Attached to yoga. But I learned in a very early stadium from Ajita that you are nothing. That sounds a little bit nihilistic. Is it the right word, nihilistic? And it can become negative, but not in that sense. Just any time when your chest fills with pride and attachment, because you think or identify with something, in my case that would have been Hapkido, Korea, you just say, I'm not. The moment that you are conscious of it, and yoga will not allow you to not be conscious of it anymore. So don't dismiss it, just say, I'm not. I'm not Hapkido. I'm not Dutch or Amsterdam. I'm not yoga or International Yoga Federation or all that superficial nonsense. I'm honest, I'm passionate, I'm sincere. And that's the only thing that counts, and that's the only way that yoga works. The rest is all superficial. I think last week I mentioned that that is actually a samadhi exercise. But that is the highest level of meditation, where you disidentify. You disidentify yourself with your identifications. Why would you do this? You become an empty shell. No. By taking back your energy from all these attachments and distractions, you can use this energy now for positive and constructive means. Even better, it will naturally manifest towards surprising new adventures. Because energy, when energy is freed up from all these attachments, where it has been stuck, when energy is freed, energy, whether that is inside you or in electricity cable, energy always wants to manifest. But it can only manifest if it's there. And most human beings are in a condition where they have energy, but that energy is occupied, is busy. And it's mainly busy with these kind of engagements. Memory, good or bad, doesn't matter. And here you can see why it doesn't matter. Because the fact is that energy is caught up, is stuck. So it is not available to manifest into new adventures. So cherish your memories, but know when to take distance from them. They are part of you, you cannot throw them away. They also are the reason why you are who you are. But then again, it's the past. Learn from it and move on. Identifying with anything just means putting yourself into a box, into a prison. And that is a condition that most people, if you look around, are actually in. It's also the reason why, compared to 20 years ago or 20 years in the future, you don't see much change other than us just getting older. But the yogi naturally ends up on a dynamic path of constant evolution. You will see. Because energy wants to manifest. It's not something that you have to do consciously. What you have to do consciously is be aware of what we discuss here, detach, and free up that energy that will then find its way gradually. Not tomorrow. It's not something that happens overnight. But compare next year, February with February 2021, and you will see what we're talking about here. You will see that change is starting to occur. Surprising things are starting to happen that you feel you are in line with. As opposed to having lived a life based on subconsciously what you were expected to do. By parents, by education, by culture, by the government. 8, Sutra 8, that repulsion which accompanies pain is dvesha. Anger, hatred, repulsion, as it is translated here. Conflict, because of ego, feeling stuck, because of attachment. It ends up in frustration, anger, resist. You want to resist. Subconsciously, instinctively, you feel stuck. You feel helpless. Because you don't understand. Ego is influencing you because you don't understand. You have become attached to the past or to a partner in a relationship. Now when you don't understand it, when you don't, see it, it influences you subconsciously to behave in ways that make you get stuck. And that frustration turns into anger. So a relationship is a good platform to see how this works. A relationship usually starts innocently with an attraction. You feel high, you feel like you're in heaven. Egoism comes into place because you can see with children who fall in love for the first time. Suddenly they start spending a lot of time in front of the mirror. I did. That egoism on a simple scale, you can see that with children. Then the attachment comes, and the love that was so high, that opened up the crown chakra, slowly start because there is a contraction of energy. Attachment comes, and inevitably conflict comes. I'm surprised to see the people that I know that are in a relationship. I'm surprised to see how often they quarrel with each other, fight with each other. I hate that. Can you just not live together without? But it is about attachment. Something that I have studied for 35, 40 years almost. For those people is an unknown element in the way they conduct themselves in their lives. So the quarrels, the conflict, is just part of it. accepted part of it. If you have a choice, would you still want to have conflict with your partner? I think not. But now we have another problem. You can't do it alone. Your partner has to be on board too. So you have to bring your partner to yoga class. So anger is an emotion, a strong emotion, it's destructive emotion. It can lead to ending relationships, whether that is professional or personal. But anger is simply another step in this process where we started off with ignorance and basically descended down the ladder on our way to getting stuck in fear. Because in the relationship, after the anger, if you don't have a strong heart, that is where you stay. At some point, the partners stop. They basically just surrender and say, my partner just doesn't want to listen to me or doesn't, so, but I don't want to be alone, so I'll just give up. Why do you give up? We say it's out of fear. Fear of what? Being alone, losing the partner that actually you have these conflicts with. Subconsciously. We will talk about that when we read the next sutra. Questions? I saw a lot of nodding today, so I think it connects. I think you recognize what this is about. That is very important. Okay, let's have a short break. We have a new pranayama today, but we'll read through the new pranayama after asana practice. Okay, let's have a short break.